Welcome all, and thank you for joining today's AWRI webinar. My name is Matt Holdstock and I'll be your webinar host today. In today's session, we will get an insight into the AWRI's practice change projects, looking at what propels some people to change and what stops others from making changes, with a webinar titled Drivers and Barriers That Influence Practice Change in Viticulture and Winemaking. In the spirit of reconciliation, the AWRI acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'd also like to acknowledge Wine Australia for providing the funding and support for the webinar program via the AWRI's Communication and Extension project. Before we jump in and make a start, just a couple of quick reminders to anyone who's new to the AWRI webinar platform. If you would like to provide a comment or ask a question, please click on the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar, type in your question and click it to send it through. We'll be holding a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but feel free to send in your questions at any stage. A reminder that also this session is being recorded and a link will be sent to you later to view via the AWRI's YouTube channel. For anyone who's just joined, welcome. Today's webinar topic is Drivers and Barriers That Influence Practice Change in Viticulture and Winemaking, and it is with great pleasure to welcome Dr. Valeria Bellan. Valeria was born and raised in an Italian town close to the French Alps. She then moved to Pavia, where she earned her master's degree in clinical and neuropsychology. Valeria then became a registered psychologist and worked for some time with neurodivergent children and adults before embarking on her PhD journey between Milan and Adelaide, where she was eventually offered a position at the University of South Australia. Her academic work focused on how the brain adapts to changes, especially when we are in pain. And after 10 years, she decided to make a change in her career and put her knowledge about the science of change at the service of the Australian wine industry, taking up a position as a behavioural scientist at the Australian Wine Research Institute. Valeria currently lives in Adelaide with her husband and her 2 children. Valeria, if you are ready, I will hand over to you. If you could just get you to share your screen there.
Perfect, thank you. All right.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, Matt, for the introduction and for having me here today. My name is Valeria. I'm a behavioural scientist at AWRI. And today I'm going to talk about a topic that is pretty new in this industry and hopefully is going to be interesting for all of you. The reason why we have a picture of a beautiful butterfly is because of the little quote that is at the bottom of this slide. We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. We are often really scared about change, but we often forget that at the end of the change, there's usually something beautiful. So what are we going to talk today? So there are 3 main topics that I'm going to guide you through. The first one is to understand why change is difficult, how change works, and when real change happens, what I mean with real change. And in the end, which is the second part of my presentation, I will focus on practice change, barriers and drivers in the Australian wine and grape industry. So before we start, because I'm a behavioral scientist and I'm really curious about what you think now, I would like you to scan the little QR code and in one word, tell me, what does practice change mean for you? I'll wait for a minute, and if you do it, probably, possibly, potentially, a beautiful word cloud will appear on our screen. Progression, beautiful. Progress, improvement, adapting. I love adapting, adapt, yes, love it. Evolution, yes, like the little caterpillar that becomes a butterfly. Innovation. Change management, whoa, that's a big one. We had a few. I will be able to share these if you want at the end. Action, okay. Okay, shall we go on? You can keep writing your word while I go on with the presentation. Okay, why change is difficult? So here comes a very important concept in cognitive psychology, that is the concept of cognitive bias, that was created by Kahneman and Tversky, actually much earlier than 2002, but in 2002 a big book about that they wrote came up. So cognitive bias is basically everything that is a shortcut to understanding and interpreting the surrounding world. So for example, you look at these two images and you don't need to be present or to talk to the person, and you immediately realize that the little kid on the left is probably angry, frustrated, the tantrum is going to happen soon, and the beautiful guy on the right is smiling, and so the feeling that he is probably feeling is joy, happiness. So we know it straight away. We don't need to ask, we just know it. Now, cognitive bias comes in all different ways. So for example, if you look at this image, you don't need to be there and touch things. You know exactly that this barrel is closer to the viewer than that 3. You know immediately 2 + 2 makes 4 without thinking or without counting. And if you are an English speaker and I say like bread and, you would finish the sentence saying butter. Now, how these cognitive bias are built is that they are built through our life experiences and education, everything that surrounds us on day-to-day basis. The problem is that this cognitive bias creates these life experiences, create beliefs and values that we live, that we create our personality and our way of living on. But some of them might not be accurate. So for example, I don't know if you know this one, but the word hummus just means chickpeas, just chickpeas, nothing else. Although we use the word hummus as anything that is spreadable, that is made of vegetables pretty much. So we can come up with stuff like beetroot hummus, or even worse, body hummus, that only because it's pink, it's terrible. So it is wrong, but it is a very common misconception and misbelief. Now, how does this apply to the wine industry? So the problem is that the beliefs that are formed directly from experience are the strongest and most resistant to change. It happened to you, and therefore it's super, super strong. So for example, I asked around to my colleagues to give me a few examples about great misconceptions that are common in the wine industry. And then one of our enologists said, to protect allergies, which is the headspace in tanks that are not full. This the explanation was for me, of course. You probably all know it. Many wineries still do the standard twice or thrice weekly dry ice using solid carbon dioxide application to allergies. Despite this practice not being very effective, the protection from dry ice only lasts for a matter of hours. Other options, such as delivering constant flow glass blends to the surface of the wine, or application of gases, provide much greater protection for a much longer duration. Nonetheless, people keep doing that. Our viticulturist, Amy, said to me that Canadian growers use a post-harvest application of copper to protect the vines against the cold, although it appears as though there's no scientific evidence for it. So really tough to change, really ingrained in the way people behave, because it comes from their experience and it comes from who knows where. So how does change work? In the figure on your left, this is from a book by Lorimer Mosley and David Butler, who did a lot of work into behavioral change in the paint fields. And you can see that at the bottom, there are 3 different types of change. There is a superficial conceptual change, there is no conceptual change at all, and there's this deep conceptual change. Now, only when this deep conceptual change happened, the real change happened, a long-standing change happened. But if we go back at the beginning and we go back to this idea of misconceptions, then there are different kinds of misconceptions. I was saying before that some misconceptions are really, really strong and they are really difficult to break. So there are different levels of misconceptions. Some are just, for example, just missing bits, a little bit of information that lack coherence, that are the easiest to tackle because you can just create a framework. Or maybe a big misconception, but it's like kind of not sticky. It stays in there. It's not influencing anything else. Although sometimes this simple misconception gets stuck to other simple misconception, and though we have a flow mental model. And if a flow mental model attaches with other flow mental models, many sticky bits are stuck tightly together to each other, and therefore we have a ginormous limestone misconception that is very, very difficult to destroy. Or, worst of all, there's just lack of pattern. A lot of misconceptions that are there, they just interact with each other in a way that is really unpredictable. So how the more difficult, the more tightly stuck together is the misconception, the more difficult it is to present a message that is going to go through everything and create a deep conceptual change. Now, I want to stop for a while and think of a common misbelief in your community and how it originated, if you know. So just, you don't have to use just one word, you can use a sentence. Just try and think of something that is common in your community, in your group of friends, in your country, if you're not in Australia, or even if you're in Australia, really. Something that is just commonly wrong, but everybody are really sure that that's exactly it. It can be a myth, it can be anything. I'll leave you 1 minute. You don't need to put your name if you don't want to, so it stays anonymous. Apparently. Mixing up name of brown beetle, grass grub, and bronze beetle. There you go. I would be one of those. Anyone else that can come up with some interesting, there's still someone writing? We'll wait for this last person. Then we go ahead and you can keep writing things. I would love to have a collection of misconceptions, especially in the wine industry. I can tell you a lot of misconception in the paying world. A lot. And also the hummus one. You only make one great wine variety in our region because of one producer. There you go. That's so interesting, isn't it? Yes, yes. Oh, thinking wingless grasshoppers are the same as crickets. Oh, oh, lady beetles are good. That's nice. I love it. All right, let's go ahead. You can, oh, climate change is a myth. Yes, that's a big one. Getting political here. All righty, let's go ahead. So how did we try to tackle this problem or understanding how change works and how and when real change happens at AWRI? So I created a framework. So this is a starting point. We call it T0, T for time, 0 for zero, but beginning. So before the event, it could be a workshop, a seminar, a webinar. We ask people the level of perceived knowledge from 0 to 10. The question that we usually ask is, at the present moment, can you please write what's your level of knowledge about and the topic? So we didn't do this in this webinar. We started trying something different just because I decided. So I thought to change something and to try something different. T2 is immediately after the event, workshop, webinar, and seminar, in which we ask not only the level of perceived knowledge, so we ask again, after attending today's event, can you please write what is your level of knowledge about now? And then we also ask, as a result of what you've heard today, what actions will you take? And I will going to explain this a little bit better in the next few slides. So the idea of asking about knowledge and not testing the knowledge is because people don't like to be tested, but also because the most important thing is that it captures the level of perceived knowledge. For example, sometimes we have negative ratings, meaning that a person comes to one of our workshop or one of our event and think, oh, I know pretty well this topic. And then at the end of the topic, they know less. Well, they know less because you don't know what you don't know. And so sometimes you realize at the end, actually, I didn't know that much. I know a little bit less, but it's not that you didn't learn enough. It's just that you realize that your perceived amount of knowledge is different than what you thought. Then we have a T2. So T2 happen usually for workshops, maybe seminars. And we look at the occurrence of practice change. So basically, we ask people 3 things. We usually do it on the phone, but it can be via survey. It can be a mixed method. It really depends on number of people or on the type of the seminar webinar. So we usually do it after vintage and after growing season. And we ask people, did you try the technique that we explained as a consequence of attending the workshop? Did you see the benefits of making this change and you didn't encounter any issues? And it's really interesting because we can go back to what they plan to do and see what they did and why something went wrong and they didn't do it, or why they did it. So what does this translate in practice change? So at T1, we ask these 4 levels. 0 level, I will make no changes this growing season vintage. So this is the answer to the question, as a result of what you've heard today, what action will you take here? So 4 options, I will make no changes this growing season or vintage, 0 practice change. I'm not currently in a position to make changes due to financial or other constraints, level 1. I will reassess my current practices, seek extra information or discuss with my peer, level 2. And level 3, I will change at least one of my current practices in the upcoming vintage or growing season. Then at T2, so after growing season or after vintage, we contact them again and ask them what happened during the growing season or the vintage. And then we classify the answer in, again, 4 levels. No change occurred. The attendee reported a change in their awareness or way of thinking, not necessarily in their behavior, but something happened. The attendee has applied at least one tangible change to their practice. We had a behavioral change of some sort. 3, the attendee has applied the whole technique, so full adoption. So to give you an example, so this that you see that the little farmer is talking, basically they are real responses of people that attended a seminar, a workshop that we run in Tasmania about spray application. So we asked them, you know, after vintage, what did you do? And some people didn't do anything, really. I didn't assess the spray coverage of my spray unit, so no change occurred. Some people said something like, it was a good prompt to engage employees to understand and to be involved in the calibration and actual setup. Change in their awareness way of thinking. They talked about it with their employees. They hoped that they did something different. This is my favorite one ever. My neighbor helped me by watching where the spray was going, giving feedback. I mean, I really hope they were just spraying water just to check and not anything that was really poisonous. But hey, the idea of having your neighbor to look around, it's a social, very social solution, and actually also an alternative way of doing it. So why not? So the attendee has applied at least one tangible change to their practice. They are checking it. And then I modified the way I set up the air share unit. So the attendee has applied the whole technique. So what is important here is that adoption and practice change cannot be conceived like a yes or no thing that happened or didn't happen. It's a longer continuum. So it might happen just a little bit. It might happen a lot. It might happen completely. And the output depends on the starting point. So it really depends on what the person was doing it before. Like if it never done anything like that, then a little change goes a long way. So for example, you can see that in people that are in pain, you can see that sometimes people that do not move, they don't even leave the house, and then they decide, oh, I'm going to have a shower this morning. It's a big thing. Of course, they are not back to self before the pain started, but it's a big thing. If a person already is doing something, is going to the physio, and then they decide to go for a walk by themselves, that's a huge thing as well. But they are absolutely 2 different outcomes because they are 2 different starting points. And finally, the real change happens when it is supported by the right reasons. And I'm going to explain this concept a little bit more in the next few slides. So, practice change, barriers and drivers in the Australian wine and grape industry. I was lucky enough to be involved in a literature review with a researcher from Charles Sturt University. And what we looked at were the barriers and drivers across the world in different industries. And what we found that the barrier is often, believe me, and surprise, surprise, economical, money, production. And this is true for everybody. It's true for Australian grape growers, non-Australian grape growers, but also other agri industry, for example, grain and bananas. So what is the main driver? The main driver is what's in it for me. So the people needs to know what can they get out of this practice change if they really are going to do it. And potentially the biggest driver, as I said, is often the money. So, but the problem is that money is often not enough for a deep conceptual change. We see it, for example, in sustainable choices or in tech adoption. So we see that there are monetary incentive to adopt a new technology, but then if the change, the reason why the person changed is not intrinsic, it doesn't come from themselves, it's just extrinsic, the money, then the technology might be not adopted anymore in the future, or maybe the sustainable choices are done in a short term, but then in the longer term, more non-sustainable choices are taken. So I'm going to explain to you, give you two examples of two practice change projects that we run between 2021 and 2024 approximately. And all the practice change activities mentioned in this presentation, so this one and the next one I'm going to tell you, have been funded by Wine Australia. So for example, this was best practice irrigation. And at the end of this project, we found these big, ginormous barriers. So one barrier was there was change in priorities. They had floods, so there was change in priority. There was no perceived need of a new tech, and people were not really keen on investing more money. So if we analyze this from a cognitive perspective, we asked key stakeholders to explain this. And this revealed that there were two strong beliefs. Do you remember the belief that were before? They were like really sandstone kind of belief. The first belief is that irrigation is not a priority now. And this is a phenomenon called with a very horrible acronym. I don't know why they decided the acronym was okay. WASYATI. I prefer what you see is all there is phenomenon. So this phenomenon, it says that basically, if you have an idea of something, you're presented with new evidence, you basically see only those that confirm your belief, and you do not question whether there is something missing. So you keep going that direction. So for example, we had quite a lot of wet years. We don't need to care about water. Then we have the floods. See, I don't need to worry about how to best manage my water. So that's a very normal thing to think and to believe. The second one is what is called status quo bias. And there is this really nice vignette on your right of the status quo bias. So there are these two guys that are like trying to dig a hole. And one says, would you like a shovel? Oh, no, I'm already using the spoon. So this is from a very beautiful website called the Decision Lab. If you're interested in biases, just go and have a look. It's really, really cool. So the idea is that I don't need new technologies. I don't need new technologies, and the status quo bias is the responsible for this one in a lot of cases. I've already done this way. I'm not really keen to change. It's normal. We always do that. We don't like change. So if we have to go back to our initial representation of how change works, we can see that basically the irrigation message that we were trying to deliver get stuff, basically. Got stuff up here. So maybe at another time and place, so there is a weak intention to change, but really what happens is either a superficial conceptual change or no conceptual change at all. So with this specific project, what we did was to go to look at new drivers. And one big driver was the one from the culturally and linguistic diverse communities of growers. Specifically, that they needed the support in their own language that they didn't have. So specifically, we engaged with the Punjabi community of growers in Riverland. You can see our growers here speaking with one of our viticulturalists when they came to visit at Wait. And we engaged with these guys working at Pendu, Australia, that really try hard to deliver and communicate messages in Punjabi about Australia. So it can be about immigration stuff, but also mainly it's about agricultural things. So we look at the barrier and we addressed it. So we look at it in a different direction. Another practice change project was the use of oxygen during fermentation. The barriers at the end of the project were mainly stilistical or philosophical choices, like that technique does not create a wine that I'm looking for, or they were already doing it. The driver to begin with was that it was easy to implement. Previously was a barrier, so we created a program around these barriers to try to address this barrier and create something that was really in need for the winemakers, and also it got really good results with minimum effort. So what was the big misconception here? Ginormous misconception that air is always bad in winemaking. Why we have this misconception? Three main cognitive biases. The bandwagon effect. When an opinion becomes popular, more people are likely to adopt it. For example, the climate change is not real thing. Or, for example, going to university. Going to university is good for you. You have to go to university, but maybe not for everybody is the right choices. Maybe other people want to do something different in their life. Social norms. What is considered appropriate within a society community of people? For example, shaking hands in the Western society or before COVID. The authority bias, accept information when it comes from a perceived authority. For example, the doctor tells you you have to do something and you usually follow their suggestion because it is a perceived authority. Now, the team at AWRI use exactly the same biases to turn the tables. So we engaged a champion. So we wanted a reputable peer, authority bias, that was local, social norms, and bandwagon effect. So to show their use of oxygen during wine fermentation. So you can see him in this small picture on your right. It's really out of focus on purpose because I think it was my very first workshop and I wasn't sure if I was allowed to do that. So that's Team Fearon. It's a workshop we run in Margaret River in December 2022. And Team Fearon is from Vas Felix, and he was happy to talk about their experience with the use of oxygen during fermentation. So this mighty one, in one word, what does practice change mean for you now? So you used the word before. I would like to see if something changed now. So I'll give you 1 minute and see if we can make another nice word cloud like before. If you reflect back what you learned, you can still use exactly the same word that you used before, doesn't matter. If you change your mind, you can consider the deep conceptual change ideas, the ideas of misconceptions, optimize processes and procedures. Beautiful. It was one word though. Didn't follow the instruction. Understanding, challenging bias. Yes. Yes. More than challenging, I think understanding and recognizing biases. It's interesting. This is why I was suggesting the website before, because it really makes you realize that there are common way that we use to make things quicker, but not necessarily in the most efficient way. Removing barriers. Yes. Habits. Yes. Psychoanalysis. No. I'm really very far away from psychoanalysis. Believe me, I am not. Being open, yes. Yes. Still one person. Efficiency, yes. All right. Oh, they're still too empathetic. Yes. Yes. It goes along really well with being open, I believe. All right, you can keep voting if you want. I'll just go ahead with my take-home messages because it's already 27 minutes. I'm really worried that Matt is going to be really upset with me. It's not going to be, it's nice. So change is difficult because we are wired to find mental shortcuts. This is what we do. This is what our minds do. It's normal. Depending on how ingrained misconceptions are, change can be more or less difficult. Real change happens when a deep conceptual change occurs. And when pushing for a change, every time that we're trying to change something, and this is true also in life, really, in everything, like parenting, relationships, everything, you always have to focus on what's in it for me, what's in it for the people that I want to change. Monetary incentives are a good driver, but not a long-lasting one. And I'm sure everybody that has kids know that you can bribe them for a little bit, but it doesn't work in the long term, unless you keep on bribing them, of course. We need a deep conceptual change, so to help people to develop intrinsic motivations. And finally, we need to identify the misconceptions, understand them, and try to change those misconceptions from the inside. All right, thank you for listening. I hope this was enjoyable, at least. I would like to acknowledge that this work is supported by Wine Australia with levies from Australian growers and winemakers and matching funds from the Australian government, and that the AWRI is a member of the Wine Innovation Cluster in Adelaide. I would also to thank all my beautiful colleagues, Matt, Megan, Robin, Con, Rochelle, Ben, Amy Richards, Josh Hickson, Simon, Marty, Ella, and Mintu Bra, with the Chief of Pendu Australia, and Riverland Wine and CCW that allowed us to develop our engagement with the Punjabi community of growers. Thank you.
Thanks, Valeria. That was great. I'd just like to remind everyone, if anyone has a question, just to type the question in on the Q&A bar down the bottom or in the chat feature and then press send and it'll come through. Okay. This is probably more a comment, Valeria, not necessarily a question at the moment. Dry ice in the headspace doesn't work, ? Since when? Could you share a scientific paper on this, please? Look, I'll just ask that person if they'd like to contact the AWRI help desk. We should be able to find some information or provide you more information about that. Okay. Another question. Oh, okay, another question. I would like to ask, how do I know if the bias area is positive or negative?
If the bias, so biases are not necessarily negative or positive. They are just biases. It's just the way our brain works. It's just like saying, I don't know, anything, memory is positive or negative. Memories can be positive or negative, doesn't really matter. So the way is that you can, once you understand how biases work, and that it's something that affects our everyday life in a positive or negative way, you can find a way to affect your decision in a positive way. So for example, if you want to change a habit, you can look at different biases and try to identify what are the biases that prevent you from changing your habit. And therefore, you can try to use the same bias to, for example, to change that habit. Let's say that you want to eat less sugar, let's say, for example, not to go too much into detail in winemaking or grape growing, that is not my area. But let's say that you want to, yes, you have more healthy habits. One thing that you can do is using a cognitive bias that is like, whatever it's, what it is, it's all we can see, and physically move all your healthy food in front of your fridge and all the unhealthy food on the back of your fridge.
Good practical advice. There's another question. Is a change in practice always the outcome for an extension activity? What if the information delivered confirmed what they were doing and they chose not to change? Isn't that an outcome? And how would you account for that in your data collection?
Yeah, it is an outcome, and this is why practice change, it cannot be a yes or no answer. And it's also because we need to be really listening to what the industry is saying, because sometimes the outcome is, well, this is not of interest for the industry. So we have to go a step back and create something that is of interest. For example, with the irrigation project, we see exactly that. We saw that the industry, for one or more reason, was not interested in developing a certain type of tool, and therefore it was actually nonsensical to just go ahead with that plan. And this is why I really think when designing a plan, a practice change plan, you always have to consider a stopping point in which you have to reconsider whether that the theme is still important for the industry. And if it is not, you have to have the ability to be flexible and to drive your project towards something that it is relevant. I don't know. I hope you answered the question.
There's another one here. How long does it take to typically change a habit?
So if you want a scientific answer, they say that it takes, for example, I think there are some studies years ago that came up with this magic number. I don't believe in magic numbers, but they did. So the short question was that you need 50,000 hours of practice to master something. They also say that you need to taste for 50 times something that you don't like in order to start liking it. This is it's a big thing in like baby winning kind of websites. I keep giving them what they don't like. At one point they will like it. It depends on the change. It really depends on the change. It depends on how strong it's your misconception to begin with, or your beliefs. And it depends on your starting point. So as I said before, again, going back to my comfort zone area, that is the back pain or the pain in general. If your starting point is, I don't even leave my house anymore because I'm in too much pain, changing from that to going back to a social, normal life, or a life that you enjoy, that might be a long process. But for people that are already surrounded by, maybe they are more supported, they are already doing something, they're already going to the physio every day, for example, or something like that, that might be a shorter process. So it really depends on what kind of change we're talking about. It really depends on your own situation to begin with. So I don't believe in magic numbers. There are no magic numbers. It depends on every single person.
Okay, there's another question that's come through. What key phrases or words could you use to try to get employees to examine their beliefs and strategies to enable a team permission to create change?
Can you read it again? It's a long question. Thank
Sure.
you.
You could probably see it too on the screen, Valeria. It says,
do I have to stop share? Maybe yes.
No, just go to the Q&A. What key phrases or words could you use to try and get employees to examine their beliefs and strategies to enable a team permission to create change?
Okay, so there are different strategies that you can adopt. It really depends on what you want to change again. If you want to explore something in particular, maybe I'm happy for you to get in touch and we can have a chat, and I can give you a couple of suggestions, because it's general. And I also can give you a couple of links on website that they create suggestion on how to make things work differently, and how to, we use this word nudge. So a nudge is basically what advertisement use to make you buy things. So for example, let's say that a nudge is you want people to go in a specific direction, therefore you put something on the floor to guide them through that specific direction. That's a nudge. But there are different kind of things depending on what your issue is. So happy for you to send me an email or something, and I'll be happy to just explore some options with you.
Okay, there isn't many more questions come through.
Oh, wow.
So look, Thank you very much, Valeria, for providing a great overview and understanding of practice change. I'm sure everyone who attended today got a lot out of this session. I'd also like to thank the audience for logging in and taking part. And I'd like to remind you that, as always, you will receive a link to review the recording of this presentation, which will be available on the AWRI's YouTube channel in the next couple of days. The next AWRI webinar is on Thursday, the 28th of November, and we'll be back in the vineyard this time, taking a look at new tools for the surveillance and management of grapevine phylloxera with Dr. Jessica Hennigan. If you'd like to register for this session, please visit the AWRI website. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you at the next AWRI webinar.
Thank you.